today we're talking with Marit Kragt from the University of Western Australia. Marit's research is at the boundary between agricultural economics and environment, so she's an ideal person to talk to about the issues we're covering in this week's part of the course. So welcome, Marit.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so first of all, the Australian government has a number of different programs that relate to environmental issues in agriculture. So we've had the National Land Care Program. Recently we had a program called Caring for Our Country. So what do you think are some of the key things that need to be considered by governments when they're trying to select which projects and which activities to fund in these sorts of programs?
So when I teach this information to my students, I always tell them that any evaluation or any decision of policy programs needs to be based on how effective and efficient the program will be in achieving its outcomes.
Okay.
So any policy program would need to consider what are the objectives that I want to achieve? And if you have specified objectives, need to determine, well, what tools are the best tools to achieve that objective?
Yep.
So that's one alignment that might be missing in some policy programs. And then, of course, you need to measure the effectiveness. And that's the whole area of environmental economics, I would say. We need to know what will happen if we don't implement the program and what will happen if we do take actions. And then as environmental economists, I would go out and measure the potential costs and benefits of each program. So in terms of the cost of the policy tools, likelihood of adoption, the feasibility, the certainty or risk associated with that tool having an actual impact, and then of course the benefits. You need scientists to measure the environmental benefits, social scientists to measure possible benefits on humans, etc.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So you sort of touched on this a little bit, but how should governments evaluate whether a policy is successful, or in fact maybe has been successful?
A government, well, they've set their objectives. Hopefully those objectives are clear. Then they need to determine what indicators can we use to measure whether those objectives have been met. So you choose very clear indicators, and hopefully, if you've chosen them properly, those indicators are smart indicators, measurable,
specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
All those things. Yeah.
Okay.
And so the challenge for many policies is to find metrics, indicators that are measurable. And the next challenge for a government is to actually go out and continue evaluating how a program is going, and to then use that monitoring information to see whether the objectives are met.
Okay, thank you. So from my experience of working with environmental agencies, there's often a lot of uncertainty about various aspects of environmental projects at the time when people are trying to decide whether they should be funded, or in fact at the time when they're trying to design the project. What do you think are the key sources or types of uncertainty that often affect environmental projects?
Environmental problems we call them wicked problems. They're incredibly complex because they involve so many systems. So we deal with natural systems which have inherent uncertainty in them. We deal with humans who may not react in a way that you expect them to react. With the environmental systems, you may not know what a specific action will do in terms of environmental benefits. And you have policy uncertainty. Governments change every 3 years. Is the policy going to continue?
Yeah, right. Okay. Good, thanks. So there's a whole variety of different uncertainties that come into play. So how then should governments, agencies, environmental managers try and cope with that uncertainty when they're making decisions? It's obviously the solution's not just to give up our hands and say it's all just too uncertain, we can't do anything. But how should they cope?
Well, they should make stochastic dynamic programming. No, sorry. So if you're a government, you always deal with uncertainty. And as Dave says, you can't just say, oh, we don't know what's going to happen, we're not going to do anything. So ideally, you make your decisions based on the available evidence. It may not be entirely certain, but you always have a best guess based on the best available evidence. So you make your best possible decision, incorporating all those possible uncertainties and looking at the most likely situation in terms of environmental impact, in terms of human reaction, in terms of current policy uncertainty. And as you implement the project, you keep monitoring what happens. So rather than saying, right, we've made the best decision in 2010, don't worry about it anymore. Continue monitoring and seeing whether you gain more information about those uncertain aspects, whether any of the context has changed, and use what we call adaptive management to potentially change some of the tools, some of the policy programs that you've put in place to achieve your objective.
Okay, so it's important to be flexible, to be willing to be flexible in future, rather than lock yourself into a particular idea of what the project should be doing that you had at the beginning.
I would say so, because next year the situation is going to be different.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I'd just like to ask you about an area that you've worked on quite a bit, which is the issue of carbon sequestration in agriculture. So what do you think are the main challenges in getting those sorts of projects adopted by farmers and making those programs successful?
In any project where you are hoping to change a landholder's behavior, there has to be something in it for the landholder. So there has to be some benefit. Either you might decide to pay the landholder, or they might undertake some action because they really like protecting the environment, and all they need is some information to help them decide how to best do that on their property. In the carbon change mitigation policies of the government in Australia, they've decided to offer landholders payments for making changes in their land management. And the changes they can make that are eligible for payments are strictly defined by the government. And as a landholder, you then go and evaluate, well, what are the costs to me of making that change? What are the benefits? Part of it will be those payments. And are those payments sufficient to cover my cost? And costs are not just costs in terms of planting the trees, fencing off areas, buying new equipment, but there will be also costs involved in terms of learning. How do I undertake carbon farming on my property? And there will be costs associated with the value that you get out of farming. I imagine that farmers are farmers because they like producing crops and livestock, not because they want to protect native vegetation. So I imagine that there will be some farmers who don't want to undertake too much environmental protection on their land because that's not what they're in the business for. From my research, though, I've seen that most farmers care a lot about the environment, and they've already taken lots of measures in terms of planting trees along their property or fencing off areas that are not so productive. And the challenge for the government is to find those areas where there's still improvements to be made, and I honestly don't really know where those would be in a productive farming system.
Okay. Thanks, Marit. That's been very interesting. Okay. Thanks for your time.
No problem. Enjoy the course.